Well, first I would like to express my warm greetings to all participating monastics and fellow lay followers greetings from SPS Monk Training Center. Tonight we continue with our exploration of the Buddha's qualities, but before we do so, let us take the time to reflect upon our wholesome qualities, our sila, and the precepts that we might hold on a regular basis, or perhaps our formal meditation practice, maybe 15, 20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day, hopefully, or just general mindfulness that we have throughout the day, going to work or driving or cleaning at home, whatever it may be. Or perhaps we recollect the Dhamma or study and read the Dhamma and really think over the implications of the Buddha's teachings. And by doing so, we are settling and preparing our mind to listen to the Buddha's words. Let's just take a couple of moments to pause and recollect. Okay. I myself am grateful to have this opportunity to come together and share the Dhamma with you. And it's a continuation. Last month's Dhamma talk explained the knowledge which a Buddha or an awakened one is endowed with. But this vidya, or this knowledge, comes accompanied with another quality, namely conduct, or caraṇā. And this is something that the Buddha was said to have been accomplished in. Now, what is conduct? What does it mean to be accomplished in conduct? And what kind of conduct was the Buddha said to exhibit in his behavior? So it's long been a while since the Buddha has passed away, and therefore there is no way for us to directly observe his person. Still, we have the examples left behind in the suttas, the earliest record of the Buddha's life, which provides us with insight into how he may have carried himself. The Buddha's behavior, though, can also be seen in those whom we regard as noble examples in our modern times, seeing those Sayadaws, the Ajahns, or the Swami Mahangsas that are presently found in Myanmar, Thailand, and Sri Lanka, respectively. This may also, they may also be found in Malaysia, especially here at SBS, with the Most Venerable Hagachitta and Mayupachaya Bhante Arya. So this is another way in which we might come into contact with the Buddha, by observing those who have dedicated their lives to follow in the footsteps of him. So let us first begin by talking about two types of conduct. And this is clearly seen in Digha Nikaya 21, the Sakkapanha Sutta. So I'll read out a passage here. So the Buddha says, "I declare that there are two kinds of bodily conduct, the kind to be pursued and the kind to be avoided. The same applies to conduct of speech and to the pursuit of goals." So there's two kinds of ways we can behave with our bodies, two kinds of ways that we can speak. And in another sutta, the Buddha even talks about two kinds of thought. There's also perhaps pursuits or goals that we may have in our life that we aspire towards. The Buddha goes on to say, "Why have I declared this in regard to bodily conduct? So why have I distinguished these two kinds of conduct?" So he says, "This is how I understand bodily conduct. When I observed that by the performance of certain actions, unwholesome factors increased and wholesome factors decreased, then that form of bodily action was to be avoided." So the Buddha saw that when I behaved in such a way, that I was losing my wholesomeness, things were falling apart. By seeing this, he said, well, maybe I should better just steer clear, huh? And when I observed that by the performance of such actions, such other kinds of actions, unwholesome factors decreased and wholesome ones increased, then such bodily action was to be followed. So when he saw the opposite about certain other actions, perhaps meditation or Dhamma contemplation or renunciation, letting go, And she saw that wholesomeness increase on account of that. And he said, okay, maybe this is what I should be cultivating and following. And this is why the Buddha has made that distinction, seeing, it almost seems to be like a nature of law, that when certain things are engaged in with a certain frame of reference, a certain way of looking at it with your mind, wholesomeness will increase while doing the opposite, by breaking the precepts and so forth, that unwholesome states will arise. And Buddha finishes this statement by saying it also applies to speech and the pursuit of goals. So, considering this and how we can implement such conduct into our own life so that it would be beneficial, not only for personal growth, but also growth in the Dhamma and growth in our interpersonal relationships, and thereby having a broader effect on society at large, not just being beneficial for oneself, but being beneficial for others. And like a simile that I like to use in this context is two vessels of water, no? One vessel is pure, the other one is polluted and impure. And so thus whatever flows from these rivers will have an effect down the way. The impure water will go on to the streams, from the streams to the lakes, from lakes to the rivers, and so forth, eventually reaching the ocean. And every time it's tainting something along the way. But the pure water, you can rest assured that it doesn't pollute anything. So wholesome conduct, which is in line with the Dhamma, has the capacity to ripple throughout our families, our neighborhoods, and ultimately the whole world. So do not underestimate how the slightest push or the smallest touch of wholesome action can radiate echoes throughout life. And if we doubt this, then consider how for more than 2,500 years, the Buddha's own conduct still impacts us today. So it's an encouragement to take the time and reflect on your actions and then divide it up. Okay, this I do, it's wholesome, it's beneficial for myself, it's beneficial for others. But these other things I do, not so clean lah. So better to maybe reduce that, be aware of it at the very least. Start to see it as a stain that you should wipe off and eventually get rid of. So also accepting that change will take time. Even for monastics, it's not like we ordain and arahantship in a second. For the Buddha, it took 6 years now? 6 long years of dedicated, intensive striving, ascetic practice. It's not easy, what we're trying to do, what we aspire to do. It runs against the stream of society. But nonetheless, it is still possible. And there's a simile found in the suttas that is somewhat relevant here, in that it talks about perhaps a carpenter or someone working in the woods who would use an adze, kind of like an axe, and he would chop away at wood and trees and so forth. And over time, there would be an imprint on this handle with his hand. You'd start to see an imprint on his hand. But he wouldn't know yesterday, okay, this amount came off, and the week before that, so much came off. Still, though, after some time, he notices something is being worn away here. So in the same way, when we cultivate wholesome speech, wholesome actions, we should be able to look back over time and say, there is some growth. My speech is better. I don't behave in certain ways anymore. I don't think in certain ways anymore. And so I'd like to round this up with a passage from the Dhammapada, verse 282, which says that wisdom springs from meditation. And the Pali word here isn't bhavana or jhana, perhaps a usual word for meditation, but the word here is yoga. And this could also mean effort or contemplation. But I'm going to lean into the word effort this time. So wisdom springs from effort. And without effort, wisdom wanes. So without continuing and growing and applying effort to discernment, to samadhi, to sila, to cultivating wholesome states, our wisdom reduces. And this very much goes in line with some right effort. And the Buddha goes on to say, having known these two paths of progress and decline, let a man or a woman or whoever so conduct him or herself that his wisdom may increase. And so it's as if two paths diverge. You have the wholesome path and the unwholesome path, and the blameworthy path. And so the wholesome path is really what the Buddha exemplified, what he embodied, and what he became accomplished in. And it's also what he encourages us as his disciples all these years later to do and to continue to do. Because it's only after the last person has practiced or is practicing, that is when the sasana really ends. So I have a question for the audience. What kind of path of progress would you like to develop? Would you like to cultivate unwholesome states? Or would you like to cultivate wholesome ones? Of course, easier said than done. But I think, as it says in that sutta, just simply being aware of them is already the first step. But that brings us to the next question. What exactly is wholesome conduct? And I like to say it's important to point out that the Vijja Charana Sampanna, which is it's not only an epithet of the Buddha, but it's also one of his qualities. It's not a special kind of conduct. It's not something that you cannot achieve. It's something that we all can develop. And in fact, conduct is found in a pretty standard list that's throughout the suttas, which is the gradual training. And this is really what the Buddha accomplished. And so I'll go through the gradual training, pick it apart, and we'll get a better sense of what wholesome conduct is. So the gradual training starts out with sila, which for the monastics includes the 227 rules. But I won't go into that, or the Mahavaga and the Chulavaga. We'll just start with the basic 5 precepts, with the first precept being killing. And this attitude of killing, born of ill will, born of dislike and hatred for somebody else, or maybe even fear. But maybe perhaps a good antidote to the ill will and the anger is metta. Cultivating metta as a meditative practice, but also the way that we speak to people, the way that we act for people, doing gestures and acts of loving kindness. And really seeing all living beings as friends. And this can really help to curb or diminish or stop entirely any mind states that would lead us to kill another person. I don't think anybody would go that far. It's generally just the housefly or the mosquito or the leech, whatever it might be. But good to refrain from killing. Next is stealing, so taking what is not given. And it's like stealing is born of covetousness, or wanting an item that another person has, or the envy, seeing these items that another person has, or wanting to amass more wealth for yourself. And it really is the opposite of generosity and letting go, really letting go of your items. Instead, you're trying to appropriate more items for yourself. The third precept is sexual misconduct. And the suttas there's quite a definition around this, but I would say in short, it's being unfaithful to your spouse, not really holding on to that bond and that I wouldn't say contract, but the agreement that you had that we'll be together for the rest of our lives is generally what you would say in America at the time of a marriage. And this can lead to the breakup of families, or maybe especially if there's children involved, it just doesn't create a good, harmonious environment for anybody. So this is why we should refrain from sexual misconduct. The fourth precept is lying. So presenting falsehoods to the world, misleading people. And there's even a sutta where the Buddha is talking to his son Rahula, who was leading people around the monastery who were looking for the Buddha, and he'd lead them to the wrong place, ha ha ha. And the Buddha says, Rahula, even in jest, you should not deceive the world, you should not lie to people in the world. Especially in this Dhamma and discipline, we are really trying to promote truth and adhere to truth. And lastly, the fifth precept. It kind of distorts one's perception and blurs one's perception of reality and makes Dhamma contemplation difficult, and it also leads one to break the other four precepts. Kind of lose control of your own faculties, and the whole basis of cultivating wholesome bodily actions, verbal actions, and thought kind of go out the window. So just to pause for a second and to encourage some reflection. Where's the audience at with that? How often are these precepts broken? How can they be maintained? And oftentimes it does require perhaps some decisions that we don't want to do. Not hanging out with certain persons, not going out on Friday nights, giving up a habit that we've enjoyed for some time. But if we are sincere about our practice and concerned about our own mental health, then it's certainly worthwhile to discard any habits that we have that lead to unwholesome states. So that's the foundation of the gradual training, sila, and morality, and wholesome behavior, which leads to blamelessness and non-agitation in the mind. From there, the gradual training moves on to speech. And since we've already covered false speech, I won't talk about it. But it goes on to talk about divisive speech, how there'll be one person in two groups, and he'll hear what this group has to say, and then he'll go to the other group and say, you know what they said? And then it's really not looking to promote harmony and concord and unity among people, but kind of almost taking delight in seeing people divided against one another. And this is also to be abandoned. It also goes to talk about harsh speech, perhaps putting another person down, or swearing, or just saying things that are disagreeable. And so the Buddha says, speak words that are gentle and pleasing and lovable, that go to the heart, that are desired by many and agreeable to many. One can do this by speaking gently in general, not being rough or coarse with one's speech. At the same time, you don't want to be too pleasing. You don't want to kowtow. I believe this is a Chinese term, but it's also used in America. You're always just trying to please another person. The next form of speech is idle chatter. And so this one is quite difficult in the world, but perhaps just being mindful of the topics that the mind can go into and how long you dwell on those topics. I think everyone would find it much more beneficial and fruitful to talk about the Dhamma and how we can cultivate wholesome quality and conduct, and spending time around such people who talk about those things. So the Buddha goes on to ask us to refrain from entertainments, and this is a tough one in the world. It's quite prevalent in our world today, and we live in a time where access to these outlets of craving, the Netflix, the YouTube, it's unprecedented. But I do find it quite important that for skillful and growth in the Dhamma, that even us as adults could do our best to reduce our time on these devices that take up so much of our attention, really. I mean, it's gotten so bad that most of these phones have digital screen time trackers, so you know, oh, okay, 9 hours today, maybe that's too much. But also, for those of you who have children, also being cognizant of how much time your children are spending on the devices. In America, we have a term called the digital pacifier. As soon as the baby starts to crying, you hand them the iPhone and say, okay, great. I've done my parenting job. But really, what are we teaching our children to do by doing so? And so it's definitely creating some kind of, it's furthering craving, I would say. It's not a reduction of craving. More so, we're doing them a disservice. Moving on from entertainment, the Buddha then, in the context of a monastic, he says he goes with his robe and his bowl wherever he goes, like a bird free. But I think how this might be considered from a perspective of laity is cultivating some sort of minimalism with the items that you have. And there's a big thing about this in America, or is a wave that's gone through America about minimalism. Just gradually reducing the things in your house. And it really is an opportunity to clean up your life, your living space, reducing the clutter, and getting closer and closer to how the monastics live, really only having what is needed. And so this is something that, to me, every time I go to travel, either when I was going to Thailand more frequently, or Sri Lanka, or even when I go somewhere in Malaysia and I pack my things, I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't even fit it in one bag. But yeah, just those periodic times where you really assess how much do I need in my life, instead of hoarding and accumulating. Okay, so after minimalism, the Buddha moves on to sense restraint. And the sense restraint involves the 6 senses. Starting with the eye, we should be more careful about what we look at, how we look at it, and how long we look at things for. As it can begin to incline the mind, what we frequently think about and ponder upon, that becomes the mind's inclination. And the same thing for how much what we are looking at or listening to and so forth. Also with the ear, to be careful of what we listen to. This can involve how much news we listen to, which tends to be quite provocative of trying to keep you there as much as possible, but also feeding any messages of fear and concern in the world. Also music. I found that even in America, with all of, when I was still a layperson, just the messages that you would hear in the music, and then you listen to that repeatedly, and then you remember it, and then you say it again out loud, and it's just, not many of those messages were so wholesome. And so what came to mind is like, if something so simple as may all beings be happy, and using that mantra to cultivate wholesome states, to cultivate metta, can have such a profound effect on the mind, what to say of music that doesn't have such a wholesome message? And it was here that I thought, how this, you begin to see how sense restraint and all of the previous points that were just mentioned begin to interweave into the precepts. Thereby, if we are lacking our sense restraint, we're more likely to break our sila. So moving on to the nose and smells is the same message. The tongue, what we eat. And the last sense would be the mind. So, which takes the objects of other senses, of the other sense doors, as its object. And you begin to ruminate, oh, what did I see at that time? What did I hear? Oh, what did I smell? And it becomes the fantasy that you draw up and concoct in your mind. But you might also begin to chew on things that you don't like, which can lead to aversion and ill will and hatred and covetousness. So again, how lack of sense restraint with the visible sense doors, but also with the mind, can begin to steer your behavior. Moving on from that, the Buddha encourages a degree of wakefulness. And if to take the strictest form of wakefulness, you would be sleeping 4 hours a night. And I know that's not feasible for most people living in the world. Most monks can't handle that. So I guess the general encouragement would be not to fall too much into sloth in regards to your sleep times, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, but to really make an effort to make use of your time in aspiring to cultivate wholesome states, or in general what you're trying to achieve in life. Because as we sleep, that's time wasted. That's time that does not get spent and used in cultivating or accomplishing whatever we want to accomplish in the world. As we are more wakeful and more alert, we begin to use that time, that alertness, to cultivate mindfulness. And this is really where the rubber hits the road, and where the mind can really begin to accomplish things. And this can be cultivated in the workspace throughout the day, on the way to work, from work, at work, going to the bathroom, whatever it may be, eating, waking up, lying down. I imagine when living in the world, the mind's going everywhere, but really applying that effort to stay in the present moment and to apply your mind to what the body's doing or what the mind is thinking about can have some profound effects. Yeah. So, as the mind becomes more mindful, it will tend to lean towards more seclusion. And on this, I think I'll touch on a bit later. But first, I'll tackle the hindrances. And the first hindrance is sensual desire. And this is a nasty one, as I was saying about entertainments. You know, when's the next movie or the next iPhone? When am I going to get pizza, baozi? Where's the durian? So, yeah, it's in many cases it's unsatiable. I mean, it is unsatiable, the sensual desire that we have in the world. It'll never be enough, and it's unfortunate. One sutta talks about how the world praises lust. It praises craving for things, and a simile that's given about that is kind of someone who looks to see his reflection in a bowl of water, and the bowl is mixed with colors. And so the mind is very much distorted, delighting in this variation of beautiful colors that it can see, and it's not really seeing the proper picture. How often do we just leap at our mind's desire as quick as possible? When do we give pause? Or do I really need that iPhone? Have I had enough durian? I had 2 already. Do I need a 3rd durian? So something to reflect on. The next hindrance is aversion. And this the world finds blameworthy. And this one I don't think I need to say so much about, because it's so uncomfortable. It's blameworthy, but it's also easy to get rid of because it's so painful and hot. And the simile given in the suttas is like a boiling pot of water just bubbling up. But I think this one is especially good to be careful of. As tensions rise politically, or there's always going to be an enemy in the world that one group or another doesn't like. But ultimately, that aversion doesn't culminate in anything beneficial for both parties. And so it's good to be careful with aversion. Moving on to sloth and torpor, my least favorite hindrance. Sloth is generally inability to do anything with your body. It could genuinely mean that you've walked a lot the previous day and you're just exhausted. Or it's quite hot, like here in Taiping, it can be quite hot in the afternoon, so there's no energy in the body. Torpor refers to the sluggishness in the mind, the inability to send the mind where you want it. And so the simile given for this one is like a bowl of algae just covered over. It's not so clear what's beneath. It's like being stuck in the mud and unable to do as one likes. Moving on to the second last hindrance of agitation and uneasiness. The simile it gives is like wind moving across water, making it ripple and whirl. So it's like this agitation, this unrested state of mind where it's constantly fixing on something and then, what about this? This is also quite difficult when you're trying to meditate and a whole hour goes by and it's like, wow, I thought the whole time. And lastly is doubt. And this doubt is about one's own ability to practice, doubt about wholesome qualities, and just general uncertainty about what to do with yourself. And the last simile that the Buddha gives for this one is, it's like dark, muddy water where things are unclear. But when one has abandoned those same 5 hindrances, the Buddha likens it to freedom from debt, from slavery, a release from prison. It's like one who's gotten rid of or suppressed at the very least these 5 hindrances is dwelling in the state of what an arahant would dwell in. And so when they're suppressed and you realize that, this is really an opportunity to rejoice that you've gotten over the hurdle, that the mind is clear and unperverted by these unwholesome swamp monsters, if you would. So when one has gotten to that state, that sense of freedom, one is able to begin to work with the jhana factors. One can really create their own sense of well-being, being your own pleasure factory, so to speak. And this is not the same kind of pleasure that you would find by eating pizza or so forth. But it's a delight. It's an enjoyment that comes about from having a peaceful state of mind. Of course, the jhanas culminate in equanimity, where these pleasant states cease. But it is an opportunity to sharpen the mind, and it is concentration that inevitably allows the arahant to break through with his wisdom. So I would like to cap off this whole segment on the gradual training with some passage from the Dhammapada. And here the Buddha says, self-conquest is far better than the conquest of others. So conquering one's own self, and this would mean one's own mind, is better than going out there and conquering kingdoms and ruling over people. He says, not even a god, an angel, Mara or Brahma, can turn into defeat the victory of a person who is self-subdued and ever restrained in conduct. And for me, this very much speaks to the reason why I became a monk in the first place. Because to make a claim about such an unshakable state, so unmovable, it's true freedom. To see the worst things happen right in front of you, but yet it doesn't affect you in the same way. I just thought that this was surely the highest thing that somebody could hope to attain. So for those of you out there, how can we emulate this noble conduct? What can we do? And one sutta came to mind. It's Anguttara Nikaya 9.118. And it's just a general encouragement to live as the Arahants would live. So I'll read out some passages here. Here, bhikkhus, a noble disciple reflects thus. As long as they live, the Arahants abandon and abstain from the destruction of life. With a rod and weapon laid aside, conscientious and kindly, they dwell compassionate toward all living beings. So for today, for this night and day, I too shall abandon and abstain from the destruction of life. With rod and weapon laid aside, conscientious and kindly, I too shall dwell compassionate toward all living beings. I shall imitate the Arahants in this respect, and the Apostata will be observed by me. So this is one in a series of 9 points that are given in this sutta. And it's just the idea that, particularly on the Apostata, but in general, it could be I'll set aside some time to cultivate the very same habits that the Arahants cultivate, to live as the Arahants would live. And the first one talks about just, I will abstain from killing living beings. I'll lay down my arms. The second point goes on to talk about stealing. So they take only what is given, and they expect only what is given, and they dwell honestly without thoughts of theft. So this point explains the importance of sila, and that you dwell free from remorse, free from this idea that I've done something wrong, I've killed this being, or I've stolen something from this person. You don't have to concern yourself with what you may have done in the past. The third part goes on to talk about sexual activity and observing celibacy. So this is something that the Arahants would also not engage in. False speech, as we've spoken about before. They speak truth, they adhere to truth, and they try to embody a sense of trustworthiness and reliableness. And they don't deceive the people in the world. They refrain from liquor and wine and intoxicants, the basis of heedlessness. This might be a difficult one for people, but they abstain from eating at night and from eating food outside of the proper time. But I think it is within everybody's capability to maybe do this one day a week or once a month, however is comfortable for you. It goes on to say that they refrain from dancing and singing and music and unsuitable shows, and from adorning and beautifying themselves, and by wearing garlands and applying scents. So setting aside the time to maybe not go on Netflix for a single day or YouTube, or put down the phone, have a tech detox, if you would, and maybe ease off on the cologne for one day. Also undertaking the practice to maybe also try sleeping on the floor. It says they lie down on a low resting place, either a small bed or a straw mat. And I found that sleeping on the floor was quite preferable, coming from the quite luxurious beds in America. And the last point it talks about is practicing the 4 Brahma-viharas. And perhaps I found it interesting that it singled out these 4 practices for aspiring, lay practitioners who were going to cultivate something for at least a day. And perhaps it has to do with that as a lay practitioner, you'll spend more time in the world, and these Brahma-viharas are quite useful if you cultivate a state of metta and loving kindness. That your interactions with people become there's less friction between you, at least coming from your side. So, as a challenge, do this on nights where everybody usually goes out. When you see everybody's going to have their Friday night revelry, maybe say, I will stay in tonight. Or make an occasion to bring it back to your homes and make it a family occasion. perhaps everybody's family isn't Buddhist, or perhaps they are, or perhaps you can have some kind of group agreement on some of the points that were made. Be more energetic if everybody were to do it as a group. Of course, SPS Monk Training Center or SPS Retreat Center is not so far away from us here, so that's also an opportunity to take the time to go on a retreat every so often. That really about sums up everything I wanted to say regarding conduct. More so turned into how we can cultivate and emulate the conduct that the Buddha had held. But much of this, the Buddha had already gone to accomplish in his lifetime. So, rounding it off, I want to express my gratitude for everybody's participation and interest and continued support for the Sāsana. It's a part of a network of people, a family that's continued its going for the last 2.5 millennia. And so do not hesitate to reflect on that from time to time, because it is truly priceless, the work that we're doing here. Also, looking forward to the trip that we were having in November, the India trip. It's my first time going to India, so it would be nice to actually walk in the footsteps of the Buddha, go to the very same places that he was living and see where he had died. And so this series of talks will continue starting next month. So from here on, we'll move on to Q&A. If anybody has questions, I would be happy to take them.
Is it possible for a Buddha to do something that is irritating or upsetting?
Absolutely. What the Buddha would do would be, as the simile I gave, it would be pure water flowing out. He wouldn't be acting out of aversion or desire. Still, people might not find his behavior agreeable. It was certainly possible for the Buddha to do something that people would find agreeable.
Bhante, how to know what kind of conduct is suitable and which things to consider for decision making?
Well, in general, you can, if you observe your mind before you do the conduct, before you engage in the speech or the action, you generally know what your aim is. And by having that space, applying mindfulness, and maybe not acting so impulsively, you might be able to, effectively steer your direction towards, your actions towards a wholesome result. What was the second part of your question?
Okay. Which things to consider for decision making?
Well, I don't know if there's a list given with speech, but with action, but with speech, the Buddha generally encourages us to establish a mind of metta, of loving kindness, before we would go to admonish somebody or speak with somebody. So, but just generally perhaps check your intentions before doing that. What do I hope to achieve by my action or by my speech?
Before admonish somebody, we have some metta for that person. Am I right, Bhante? Just now you mentioned something like this.
Yeah, establish a mind of metta, but also ask them, is this a good time for you? Are you open to receiving this feedback that I might give you?
Oh, so Bhante, sometimes I have this question for myself. If I were to, like last time when I was a teacher, when I'm going to scold the student, reprimand them, I will give metta to them. May you be well and happy. And before I scold them, I question myself, is that is that a true metta? Is there intention behind it? Bhante, what are your views on this?
I'm not sure how your mind state was at the time, but there is a particular sutta that comes to mind where the Buddha says, is it timely, is it beneficial, is it true? And if it doesn't meet those three things, then I won't speak on it. but he adds an additional component where, okay, it's timely, it's beneficial, it's true, but it's not welcomed by the other person. But even then, if he perceives that it would be for their benefit, he goes on to say it, even though it might not be welcome to that person. And being in your position as a teacher, you might have to give someone some harsh redirection. I mean, that kind of comes with the role, even though they might not find it agreeable. You do it out of their own benefit, for their own benefit and welfare. And there's several passages where the Buddha says just this.
Yeah, hi, Bante. Yeah, I have a question regarding for lay people, right? Sometimes we may see monks acting inappropriately. For example, asking for expensive stuff, holding money, driving luxurious cars and things like that. So, as a lay person, what should we do? Should we, keep quiet, ignore it, or, speak out about it?
That's controversial. There is the part of us that doesn't want to kind of ruffle any feathers or make any waves and just bottle it up and keep it to ourselves. On the other hand, if we never point out another person, even a monastic person, their unwholesome conduct or their obvious lack of discipline, lack of following the Vinaya, how will they ever recognize it? Especially if they would like to keep your continued support. If they're not living up to what the Buddha imagined a monk would be like, I would personally say something, but I understand that it's not comfortable to do that. I mean, the lay people they do have a check and balance in the whole, what the Buddha called it, the four assemblies. You have the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, and male and female lay followers. And if the lay people always just let the monks do as they wish, even though they're not keeping the precepts or following the Vinaya, then the Sangha is just going to decline and the standards will just decline. So it is very much, I would say you do have a check on the Sangha, and not to be afraid to use that.
Bante, just a follow-up question, right? I mean, isn't it like unwholesome for us to be criticizing the monastic? I mean, and if it's not right, then how should we actually say it? Because usually, we especially in Asia, we held the monastic in a very high regard, so we don't want to kind of offend, sound offensive. So yeah.
Well, that depends just how you choose to execute that. If you go into the monastery screaming, you're all terrible monks, I'm not supporting you anymore, I hope you go to hell. I mean, that's just not going to go off so well. But if you really establish, okay, I want to see the Sangha shine and grow, and I want my donations and my generosity to be used well, coming from this state of mind, and then approaching the Bhante and say, Bhantes, or I would like to address the Sangha on this, or maybe not going alone, but coming with a group of lay supporters who feel the same way, you might be able to effectively get your message across without feeling like it is unwholesome. Again, if it comes from a sense of care and loving kindness, then it can it can't go wrong. Insofar as a negative result, there won't be a negative result with that.
Bhante, I have a follow-up question on that. If we feed the unwholesome thoughts or comments about a monastic, isn't it then we are also cultivating a reaction towards that, aversion towards that?
Absolutely. It's just, this is where compassion might come into play. On the other hand, being a monastic and being given so much generosity and understanding that the practice is it's not an easy thing to first do in the first place, but also sustain throughout your whole life. You understand that, we do being a monk does come with responsibilities, and we don't always live up to that responsibility all the time. So having this sense of compassion could help. At the same time, as I said, you don't want it to go too far. And I swear there's even a sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya where it talks about a gift that is given to someone who's not worthy, or it doesn't give you the same fruit. Giving to an arahant is quite beneficial. Giving to a monk who is not upholding the precepts in the same way or has wrong views, this is much less beneficial.
My curiosity is that if we have such concern, should we actually direct the question to the preceptor, to the teacher, our comments, or if going towards the monastic may sound a bit too rude?
As long as the preceptor is not also breaking the rules, then you might have to. Yeah. But if it's just one monk in the community, then maybe better to address the more senior monk. Maybe he'll let him handle it. But if it's the whole community, then it's like the whole bunch of apples is spoiled, and what to do?
Bhante, in your opinion, in what way should the laity behave themselves towards each other and towards the monastics? I mean their conduct, the laity's conduct.
Of course, the monks are showered with a bit of respect and consideration. I think on that, like, that's okay. But like, from my time as a layperson, from what I observe, like the lay people themselves don't always interact in the best and harmonious ways. I haven't spent so much time around the lay people in Malaysia, but in America, our kind of respect hierarchy is, everyone starts to treat each other as the same, even like a parent to a son. It's like there's not so much respect in that culture anymore. So to answer your question,
do you find some unpleasant actions from devotees that you encountered?
Sometimes the devotees can, the monk is speaking, he's trying to make a point, they cut him off. That's never nice. Even among monastics, when people kind of cut off the teacher when he's trying to speak, just kind of, they have the urge to say what they have to say, can not be so respectful. But I think in general, relationship, as I've seen in Malaysia, is very respectful from laity to monastic. But I guess something that the laity can do among themselves is probably take some of these elements and consider how they can implement that among themselves. Care for one's parents, care for each other. When it speaks about loving kindness, not only thinking may all beings be happy, but how can I exhibit this in my behavior? How can I show them loving kindness, both in public and also in private?
With regard to wholesome and unwholesome conduct, I just interested to know about the fifth precept, which is not taking liquor intoxicant. Okay, now it is only mentioned in the precepts. If we look at the suttas, when they talk about virtues, silas, there's only 7 normally mentioned, which does not include taking of liquor. So does taking liquor itself, if supposing we do not lose our mindfulness and commit all the other bad conduct, is drinking itself an unwholesome action and bring bad karma?
This is to some degree a controversial point. I know that Lumpur Hai didn't seem to be thought that drinking alcohol was not such a deal breaker for becoming a sotapanna, since there is this Sutta Sārakkhani who was quite an alcoholic, but when he had passed away, or around the time of his passing away, he became a sotapanna. But it's like if you understand that drinking might cause me to break the other precepts, it'll dull my senses, dull my inhibitors. I'll act however I feel like at that time, and you do that knowingly, and then you drink, knowing that anything could happen, especially if you 3, 4, 5 drinks, however many drinks you have until you're inebriated, then I would say it's probably unwholesome because you're going into that knowingly. For someone who doesn't know that, I would also say it's unwholesome. I mean, it's not something that the Buddha ever says is wholesome. It's not something that he's ever permissive of.
If somebody get offended about what I said or what I did, does it show that my action was unwholesome?
No. I mean, you could say to somebody, "Oh, I really like your dress. What, do you think I'm fat?" Like, you could have been out of pure, genuine intention to compliment somebody, yet because of their own insecurities or past events, they would have taken your comments out of context and reacted harshly on that. So it definitely, no. I mean, it's all about, the Buddha said, karma is intention. So depending on what you intended at the time that you spoke or acted, that determines whether it's wholesome or not.
Hello, Bante. I would like to seek your experience or your comment. From my view, like someone who tends to act harshly towards another one. Example, like when one gets angry, he will act violently, although he knows that it's not correct, but out of the emotion maybe overcome that person and he acts according to his emotions. So from your view or from your experience, could you elaborate on this? Why that we know is incorrect, but we still act out of our emotion? And second part of it, that from your training, how we overcome this issue, we overcome this kind of action, like that we act, the emotion overcome us more than what we should, what is right.
So why do we knowing that acting out of anger is bad, but still engaging in that conduct? Why do we do that? I'd say the simplest answer is just we have a whole lifetime of doing such behavior. We've acted so many times almost out of habit. We see something we don't like, we scold the person, we yell, and then it finally comes to the time where we're trying to stop that, and there's just so much momentum behind those habits we've created. And I guess how someone would overcome that is just maybe just discern, okay, what is it? Do I have a lot of desire? Do I have a lot of sensual desire? Do I have anger? And so forth. If you've determined it's anger, this is where mindfulness would come into the picture, where you've been aware of your behavior throughout the day. Somebody says something to you that you don't like, and then that's where you really start to apply the mindfulness. Okay, I did not like that. I heard that. I can feel my chest starting to get hot. My stomach's not feeling good. My head's starting to heat up, and that's where you really have to check yourself. My usual action would be, okay, I'm gonna yell at this person, or I'm gonna throw something across the room. You have the option now. You have the mindfulness. You can start to steer these things once you have the mindfulness in play. But if you're not mindful, you don't really have a fighting chance. Habit is going to take over, and the anger is going to take over, because the anger just kind of it surges through the body, and next thing you know, you're doing things that you wouldn't do otherwise. So mindfulness also helps. Also metta. Metta is quite beneficial, but that does take. You do have to dedicate, the 30 minutes or hour per day to really get into the meditation practice, because it does have an effect, on our minds.
To further ask is, but if that person doesn't have that intention to change, he knows he has a bad temper, but he doesn't say like, I need to change. He doesn't have that intention. If he has that intention, he can practice like metta or mindfulness but he doesn't feel like I need to change. So what is your view about this?
Run. It's just, yeah. I mean, it depends who this person is in your life, you know, as a family member, a friend, but yeah, it is unfortunate when people don't really see that there is a problem and see that, you know, that they can make efforts to change it. And all we can really do is try to apply compassion to such a person.
How about ourselves? If we don't see that we need to change, how can we see that our issue? Then we have this motive, intention to change.
We ourselves don't see it. I guess if you don't see it, you would not ask the question in the first place, because you'd think everything was okay. But I guess like the beginning steps to wanting to change is maybe speaking to other people. You know, okay, when I get angry, when I'm throwing that cup across the room, how does it make you feel? And people will give you genuine feedback. And then if you care about their opinion, or if you care about your relationship with such a person, then you might begin to, you might be concerned enough to begin to change your behavior. That is, if it is affecting the people around you.